Hi, everybody. It's Rebecca, and I have an update for you on day 5 of the trial of Penelope McGee. Yes, she is on trial for manslaughter of her ex-husband, Andrew Savitz. Now, we jumped into this one late. This is only my second episode here, but this is being broadcast on Court TV, and I'll explain a little bit about what's going on and about what we heard yesterday from the medical examiner about this man's cause of death. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Hey, don't forget, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe, consider becoming a member. Have I mentioned everything? Oh, notifications. You want to make sure you hit all so you don't miss a single episode. You also want to check your phone to make sure your phone is allowing you to receive notifications from YouTube. Okay. So Penelope McGee, 58 years old, she is on trial for manslaughter. Now, I talked a little bit about the eggshell theory yesterday. You take your victims as you find them. Well, this was not a well person. And when I described the eggshell theory yesterday, we learned it in law school in our torts class. In other words, negligence class. So if you're negligent in some way towards someone else, then whatever the consequences are, whether they're a well person or not a well person, you just take them the way you find them. And the example for that would be, the main example would be like a car accident. You get into a car accident and the person you run into dies of a heart attack. Well, it might not have caused a heart attack in a 28-year-old, but you ran into a 99-year-old and now he's dead, and you were negligent and you're at fault for that death. But this has not really been it's not a concept that's well known in criminal law. Like, are you responsible for this person's death? Now, manslaughter, she's being tried for manslaughter, so that she's not in front of a jury. Her attorney convinced her to, let's do this in front of the judge, because this judge is a reasonable judge. And that's really what we're talking about here. What is reasonable? Was it reasonable for her to believe that she could get into an altercation with this man and he would, did she have any thought that he would collapse and die? And how far are we going to take that? Say she hadn't even been there. Say maybe they were on the phone and they're arguing and he drops dead of a heart attack. Do we still blame her? This is a criminal case. So a lot going on here. So we heard from the daughter. She is an eyewitness, but she's also very, very angry with mom. So reason to kind of doubt her credibility a little bit. But she does say that she witnessed mom shoving and pushing dad. So on day 5, we hear from the medical examiner. Now, the medical examiner, she'll go through everything. Let me back up a bit. This is not a trial that I'm sitting through listening to the entire trial, because it's not being broadcast. It's just something Court TV is actually monitoring, and they bring you snippets of testimony here and there. So my assumption is that the medical examiner took the stand. She was probably there for a lot longer than what I saw on camera. But, they always have to go through their background, their education, their qualifications. Then they have to talk about how they do an autopsy, how they determine the cause of death, and how they determine that whole thing. What did she review in preparation to make this decision? And she did say that she had reviewed his medical records, like the emergency room. She reviewed the police report, that kind of thing. So let me get to her testimony. So first thing she does is an external examination. So they take whatever clothing is on the body off. They take pictures, they take photos, and she has a diagram that she's going to illustrate where she finds any injuries on any exterior part of his body. So she said he had a bruise on his left eye, lacerations on the inside of his lip. So maybe he bit his lip or at some point, we don't know. On his back, he had some abrasions. He also had some on his right arm and left leg. In other words, just scrapes. But none of those would in and of themselves have caused his death, according to her. And she said it would be very difficult to date those injuries because, if she, for example, she said, if you have 3 bruises, then you can date them. One's blue, one's green, you can look at the coloration of the bruise and maybe date them. But in this case, she couldn't date those injuries. So she did see some EKG records that supported that from the emergency personnel that were at the scene. She saw some EKG records that supported that he had a STEMI, which is an ST elevation myocardial infarction. That's what STEMI stands for. And that's a severe emergency. Like if you come in to an emergency room, they are going to call a STEMI alert. That cath lab is going to be, setting up the table, getting ready to operate on this guy. I don't know if he got to the OR in time. I haven't seen those records. We haven't heard from anybody that testified from the emergency room about whether he actually got to a cath lab where they could, clear out the clog that he had. So then she does an internal examination, and she said the heart was enlarged, which is all of this that I'm going to tell you about is really evidence of his cardiovascular disease, severe cardiovascular disease. Mitral and tricuspid valves. So the valves in his heart that open and close were very thick, which means they're not functioning the way you would like them to. Severe stenosis. Now, stenosis means like you take a pipe, and stenosis means you've got calcification on the inside of that pipe that is so bad. In him, it was 90% occluded. That hole, only 10%, water could have only gotten through, or blood, 10% of that hole because of all of the calcification in that artery. Not just the left anterior descending pulmonary artery, but the right coronary artery. Also, the right coronary artery was 60%. And then the left, okay, I'm getting confused. Right and left, 90%. Then the left circumflex artery was 60%. So let's just suffice it to say he had a bad heart, a really bad heart. And stenosis of the aorta. Now that's the major vessel that goes in and out of the heart. And same thing, major stenosis. So that was occluded quite a bit. So I said all that to say this, this guy's, if it hadn't been then, it was going to be sometime soon if he didn't address this matter, like get himself to a cath lab or cardiologist who would get him to a cath lab. He was going to die pretty soon. It was just a matter of time. He wasn't going to live very long with this kind of heart. She found that he had an old infarct of the brain, which would support the history that we know that he had had a stroke. He had kidney damage, findings were consistent with someone who has long-term hypertension. His pancreas was fibrotic, which is evidence of diabetes. We knew he was diabetic, so you're going to expect to find some damage to the pancreas. And he had been on a continuous glucose monitor, something else that she recognized on the external examination. So her cause of death, she recorded as a cardiac dysrhythmia following an altercation, exacerbated by hypertension, diabetes, and severe atherosclerotic and cardiovascular disease. So she basically said his heart misfired, which is what I was saying yesterday. At some point where she's shoving him, she put him into a rhythm that was not survivable, apparently. So that was the cause of death. Then she classified the manner of death. Now, manner of death, this is why they didn't want in front of the jury, because a lot of juries don't understand that when a medical examiner gives a manner of death, especially of homicide, it doesn't mean that this defendant is guilty of homicide. It's a medical definition. It just means that the person died at the hands of another. And in this case, she found that it was a homicide. She said he would not have passed away if not for the circumstances that occurred on that day. But what about the next day? Or the next day if he was mad at somebody else? Yeah, it was going to happen. So she said, yeah, this death was induced by a verbal assault. Okay. So, yeah. So now it's up to the judge, because the state has rested their case. But before we get to what I think about what the judge is going to do, there was a couple of people I missed from yesterday. The paramedic who said that when they got there, he was in cardiac arrest. And he did admit that some of the injuries that were present on his body could have happened during CPR. Yeah. So that would explain that. Then there was a patrol officer that said when he got on scene, she was standing next to Mr. Savitz, and she was very cooperative. She had no signs of intoxication. She was pacing, very anxious. He thought she was in shock. Not that she was angry, but just in shock. And that his description of the victim when he got there was that he was gurgling, he was breathing slightly, and that he did have a pulse. So maybe she was right. Maybe he didn't need CPR. So now the state is rested. I don't know if this woman's going to take the stand. I won't know because it's not being televised. I won't know till tomorrow if we're going to get an outcome from this. It may be something that she takes under advisement and doesn't render a decision. She, being the judge, doesn't render a decision for a day or two. Last time I saw a bench trial, it took the judge 3 weeks to come back with a decision. And it came back with a not guilty. So, so what this judge has to decide is, were her actions reasonable or unreasonable under the circumstances? Was this death by homicide, manslaughter or homicide by a heart attack? Homicide by heart attack. I will tell you, I had a friend when I lived in Florida, Florida, whose brother actually went to prison. He got into an altercation with his neighbor, elderly neighbor. Guy was mouthing off, and he got into it with him, and the guy collapsed and died. They put him in prison. They convicted him. So it is a thing. She could get convicted. That's a possibility. I'm going to go on the fence and say, no. I'm going to say that in this case, no. No. She knew he had a heart disease. She knew that. She knew he had a stroke. I don't know to what extent she knew about his cardiac condition, because I haven't seen the medical records. We know that she took care of him after he had his car accident. She may not have known the extent of his cardiac disease. And if his cardiac disease was that extensive, why weren't they intervening? If a medical professional had known and documented that extensive of cardiac disease, he would have been at a cath lab. So that tells me that they knew there was some cardiac disease, but they just didn't know the extent of it. Maybe he hadn't got to the cardiologist yet. I don't know. So what do you think? Let me know down in the description what you think of this case. The other thing is, let me know if you would be interested in me covering the Baldoni, Justin Baldoni, and what's the other lady's name? You know who I'm talking about. They were in that movie and they're accusing one another. There's text going back and forth. And yeah, it's a great movie, by the way. She's like a really good friend of Taylor Swift. Like, Taylor mentioned some of her kids in her songs, and her name is not coming to me right now. But if you want me to cover that, let me know. There was a hearing the other day. I can look into it, let you know what that was all about. So have a great day, everybody. Take care. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be live tonight, 7 p.m. I'm going to show you this crochet project I started. It's called Wish Upon a Star Cardigan. I'll show you what I've got done so far. Take care, everybody.